Unspoken frequency. Chapter 1. The seat 2 rows back. The first thing Rue noticed about Haru was that he never turned around. It was the second week of 10th grade, and their homeroom teacher had just finished rearranging the seating chart for the third time that month. An exercise in bureaucratic optimism that never seemed to improve anyone's grades but did occasionally rearrange the social landscape of the room in interesting ways. Rue had been placed 2 seats behind and 1 to the left of a boy named Haru. Quiet, unremarkable on paper, the kind of student teachers described as attentive, because there was nothing more specific to say about him. Rue didn't think much of it at first. He had other things occupying his 15-year-old brain. Whether he'd bombed the math quiz, whether his mother would notice he'd skipped breakfast again, whether the girl 2 rows over liked the boy who sat behind her, which was, in the great ecosystem of high school gossip, the only news worth tracking that week. But over the following days, he found his attention drifting, again and again, to the back of Haru's head. It wasn't romantic yet. Not exactly. It was smaller than that, more curious. Haru sat very still. He didn't fidget, didn't whisper to the boy beside him, didn't glance at his phone under the desk the way most of them did. He simply sat, spine straight, gaze fixed forward, as though the classroom around him were something to be endured rather than participated in. It made Rue wonder what was going on inside his head. He wouldn't have guessed the truth in 100 years. Nobody would have. By the third week, Rue had started cataloging small details without quite meaning to. Haru wrote with his left hand but held chopsticks with his right. He was the only student who thanked the teacher, quietly, at the end of every class, even the boring ones. He had a habit of touching 2 fingers briefly to his temple when a question was directed at him, as if steadying something before he answered, though Rue didn't understand yet what that gesture actually was. It was the 4th week when Rue first caught himself thinking, unprompted, in the middle of a lecture on regional geography. I wonder what his voice sounds like when he's not answering a question he already knows the answer to. He'd blushed, alone, at his own desk, mortified at a thought that had arrived without his permission. He didn't know then that somewhere 2 seats and 1 column ahead of him, Haru's shoulders had gone very slightly rigid, and that Haru had spent the rest of the class staring so hard at the blackboard that the geography teacher had complimented him afterward on his impressive focus. It became a habit neither of them chose. Rue's thoughts, unguarded and unfiltered in the particular way of a boy who didn't yet know anyone was listening, drifted toward Haru with increasing frequency as the weeks went on. Small things at first. He has a nice profile when the light hits him like that. I wonder if he's always this serious, or if it's just a school thing. I bet he'd be different if you got him to laugh. Haru heard every one of them and said nothing, because there was nothing in the world he could have said that wouldn't have ended everything before it had even properly begun. By the time the first term ended, Rue had made a habit of watching Haru during the quiet stretches of class. Not staring exactly, just noticing the way you notice a song stuck in your head without meaning to hum it. He noticed that Haru always sat a little apart from the others at lunch, not from exclusion but from some quiet preference of his own. A book open in his lap more often than not, though Rue privately suspected he wasn't always reading it. He was right about that, though he'd never have guessed why. Haru used the book as camouflage on the days when the cafeteria noise, actual and otherwise, became too much to bear all at once. 100 students eating lunch meant 100 low murmurs of thought pressing in from every direction. Worries about tests, embarrassments about crushes, someone's stomach growling, someone else silently rehearsing an apology they'd never work up the nerve to give. Most of it Haru had long since learned to let wash past him like static, the way a person living near train tracks eventually stops hearing the trains. But Rue's thoughts never faded into static. They arrived crisp and specific, impossible to blur into the background no matter how hard Haru tried, and by December of that first year he'd stopped trying quite so hard. He's eating alone again, Rue thought, 1 lunch period, 3 tables away. I wonder if he'd mind if someone sat with him. I wonder if I'd have the nerve to be the one to try. He didn't, not that day, nor the next several after it. But 2 weeks before winter break, emboldened by nothing in particular except a restlessness he couldn't quite name, Rue carried his tray over anyway and sat down across from Haru without asking. "Is this seat taken?" he said, already sitting. Haru looked up from his book, and for one unguarded second, something flickered across his face that Rue would spend years afterward trying to correctly identify. Not surprise, exactly, more like relief laced with dread. The expression of someone who has been waiting for a knock at the door and is now terrified to open it. No, Haru said. Go ahead. They didn't talk about anything important that day. Rue mentioned a movie he wanted to see. Haru mentioned briefly that he liked the soundtrack of a different one. And that was, more or less, the entire conversation, stretched thin over 20 minutes of otherwise comfortable silence. But it was enough that Rue came back the next day, and the day after that, until eating lunch across from Haru became, without either of them ever formally deciding it, simply what they did. Haru, for his part, spent every one of those lunches carefully not listening as hard as he possibly could, and failing every single time. Chapter 2. What the Quiet Boy Heard. Haru had been able to hear thoughts for as long as he could remember, though it had taken him years to understand that not everyone lived this way. He was 5 years old the first time he realized something was wrong, or different, though at 5, wrong and different felt like the same word. He'd been standing in the kitchen doorway, watching his mother chop vegetables, and he'd heard her thinking, clear as speech, about how tired she was, how she wished his father would come home earlier, how she sometimes wondered if she'd made the right choices with her life. She hadn't said a single word of it aloud. Her mouth had stayed busy with a small, distracted hum while she worked. He'd asked her, innocently, "Why are you sad about Dad?" She'd frozen, knife hovering over a carrot, and asked him very carefully what he meant. He didn't have the vocabulary yet to explain that he'd simply heard it, the way you hear anything, except it hadn't come through his ears. By the time he was old enough to explain it properly, he'd also learned, through a series of small, quiet disasters, blurted observations that made adults go pale and quiet around him, that this was not a thing to be explained to anyone at all. So he learned to keep it to himself instead. By the time he reached high school, he had built, brick by brick, a kind of internal architecture designed entirely around not being noticed. He kept his expression neutral. He answered questions precisely and briefly. He avoided close friendships, not because he didn't want them, but because closeness meant proximity, and proximity meant volume, and volume meant the risk of hearing something he wasn't supposed to know and letting it slip in some unguarded moment. It was safer, he'd decided somewhere around age 12, to be a quiet, unremarkable presence that people described, at best as polite and at worst as hard to read. He had gotten very good at being hard to read. It was, in a way, the central irony of his entire existence. The boy who could hear everyone's secrets had constructed the most impenetrable secret of all, himself. And then, in the second week of 10th grade, a new seating chart put a boy named Rue 2 seats behind him and 1 to the left, and every single wall Haru had built over the previous decade began, slowly and without his permission, to develop cracks. It wasn't dramatic, not at first. It was small things, the particular texture of Rue's thoughts, which were louder than most people's, not because Rue thought unusually loudly, but because Haru's attention kept snagging on them, the way your eye catches on the one crooked picture frame in an otherwise straight row. I wonder what his voice sounds like, Rue had thought, early on, and Haru had gone rigid at his desk, stunned by how much that single unguarded thought had affected him. He told himself it was only curiosity. He told himself the same thing a month later, and again at the 3-month mark, and by the time winter break arrived and Rue had started eating lunch across from him, an act of simple, uncomplicated friendliness that Rue almost certainly didn't think twice about, Haru had stopped being able to tell himself anything convincing at all. He's eating alone again, he'd heard, the day Rue first sat down across from him. I wonder if he'd mind if someone sat with him. I wonder if I'd have the nerve to be the one to try. Haru had wanted badly to say something, anything that might make it easier for Rue to try. But saying the right thing at the right moment required a kind of honesty he wasn't built for. Not with a stranger, not even with someone whose thoughts he already half knew by heart. So he'd simply looked up from his book and said, "No, go ahead. And let Rue do the rest of the work alone," the way Rue always eventually did, without ever knowing that Haru had spent every one of those lunches carefully failing to not listen. It became the loneliest, fullest year of Haru's life. Every day, a boy he was falling for sat 2 seats behind him, radiating thoughts he was never meant to overhear, thoughts that ranged from ordinary, "I hope the cafeteria has the good curry today," to devastating, "He probably doesn't even notice I exist," not really, not like that, and Haru absorbed every single one of them in silence, because the only alternative was confessing a secret so strange it would almost certainly cost him the one relationship, however small, however carefully rationed, that had made those 2 years of high school bearable at all. He used to sit 2 rows ahead of Rue specifically so he'd have an excuse not to turn around. It didn't help. Nothing helped. He simply learned to live quietly, inside a frequency only he could hear, tuned permanently to a signal he could never once acknowledge receiving. Chapter 3. Small Weathers. The 2 years that followed were made of small weathers, the ordinary, cumulative texture of a friendship that neither of them ever named as anything more, though both of them privately understood it to be something more, all the same. There was the school festival in the autumn of their second year, when Rue's class ran a small cafe stall and Haru, roped in by a classmate's insistence that everyone has to help, found himself washing dishes in the makeshift kitchen behind the stall while Rue took orders out front. During a lull, Rue had ducked behind the curtain with 2 cups of the lukewarm tea they were serving, handing one to Haru without ceremony. "You looked thirsty," Rue said. "Also tired. Also like someone who's been washing dishes for 3 hours without complaining once. Which honestly isn't normal." "I don't mind it," Haru said, accepting the cup. "It's quieter back here." Quieter than what? Rue thought, curious, though he didn't ask it aloud. Haru heard the question anyway and didn't answer it, not with words. He only drank his tea and let the silence between them stretch into something comfortable rather than awkward, the particular kind of quiet that only exists between 2 people who have decided, without discussing it, that they don't need to fill every gap with talking. There was the week before final exams in their second year, when Rue showed up to school looking pale and hollow-eyed, having clearly not slept properly in days. Worried, Haru knew without needing to be told, about a home situation involving his parents that Rue never once mentioned out loud to anyone, not even Mina, not fully. Haru had said nothing about what he knew, because he'd promised himself, always, never to use what he heard as a shortcut past what people chose to share. But he had, quietly, without explanation, started leaving a can of warm barley tea on Rue's desk before homeroom began, 3 mornings running, and had never once acknowledged doing it when Rue, baffled and touched, asked around trying to find out who it was. "It's probably just some secret admirer," Kenji, who wasn't Rue's friend yet at that point, just a classmate with a big mouth and bigger opinions, had joked, and Rue had laughed it off, never once suspecting the truth, never guessing that the boy 2 seats ahead of him already knew exactly how frightened and exhausted he'd been that week, because Rue had thought about it, loudly, helplessly, every single morning on the walk to school. There was the day, in their 3rd year, when Rue got into his first-choice university's design program and could barely sit still through the rest of the school day, thrumming with an excitement he hadn't yet told anyone. Haru had heard it before Rue announced it to the class, had felt something in his own chest lift in response to Rue's joy the way a held breath finally releases, and had allowed himself, just once, the small luxury of turning around in his seat and saying, "Congratulations," before Rue had said a single word about it out loud. "How did you?" Rue had started, stunned. "You've had that look on your face all morning," Haru said, which was true in its way, though it wasn't the whole truth. "Lucky guess." Rue had laughed and let it go, delighted too much by his own good news to interrogate the timing too closely, and Haru had turned back around in his seat, quietly proud of himself for finding, at last, one small moment where his impossible advantage had let him give Rue something instead of just taking, in silence, everything Rue never knew he was giving away. There was also, near the end of their 3rd year, the closest thing to a near confession either of them ever managed before graduation, though neither of them, afterward, ever agreed on whether it had really been that at all. It happened on a warm evening in early spring, the 2 of them lingering after cleaning duty had ended, alone in the classroom while the rest of their year filtered out toward the gates. Rue had been quiet for a while, unusually so, sweeping the same stretch of floor longer than it needed. "Can I ask you something?" Rue said finally, not looking up. "Of course. Do you ever think about after this? Like after graduation? Whether we'll still—" He stopped, seemingly unsure how to finish the sentence in a way that didn't reveal more than he meant to. "Whether we'll still know each other. Whether this, whatever this is, survives outside of a shared homeroom and a seating chart neither of us chose." Haru heard all of it, the spoken half and the unspoken half both, and for one long suspended moment, He considered saying everything, the truth about the ability, the truth about the years of careful listening, the truth about exactly how much he didn't want this, whatever it was, to end with graduation. He opened his mouth. He came genuinely within a single breath of it. And then he thought of every version of that conversation going wrong, every version where Rue recoiled, where 8 years of careful friendship curdled instantly into fear and distance, and the breath went out of him instead as something smaller, safer. "I hope so," he said simply. "I'd like that." Rue looked up then, something searching in his expression, as though he'd been hoping for a different, larger answer and had decided, in the end, that this one would have to do. "Yeah," he said. "Me too." Neither of them said anything else about it. They finished sweeping in silence, and walked out of the classroom together. And if either of them noticed how close they'd come to something neither was ready for, neither said so aloud. Chapter 4. The Clean Ending. Graduation day arrived the way most enormous days do. Smaller than expected, oddly ordinary, full of logistics that left little room for the feelings underneath them. There was a ceremony, long and formal, full of speeches that none of the students particularly listened to. There was the ritual exchange of yearbooks, signed in haste with messages that ranged from sincere to deliberately cryptic. There was the strange, floating unreality of walking out of the school gates for what everyone understood, without needing to say it, was very possibly the last time most of them would ever do it together as a group. Rue found himself standing near the gate afterward, waiting for his parents to arrive and take the obligatory photographs, watching the crowd of his classmates thin out in 2s and 3s. Haru was a little further off, similarly waiting, similarly alone in the particular way that a person can be alone even inside a crowd of people they've spent 3 years beside. Rue watched him for a long moment and thought, deliberately, carefully, the way you might close a door quietly so as not to wake someone. "I hope you have a good life, even if it isn't with me." He meant it as a kind of gift to himself, a clean way to close something that had never technically opened, a permission slip to let go of a feeling he'd carried for 2 years without ever giving it anywhere to go. He didn't expect anyone to hear it. He certainly didn't expect it to land, with the force of a struck bell, in the chest of the one person it was about. Haru heard it exactly as it was meant. Softly, finally, like the last line of a letter someone had decided not to send. And for one unbearable second, he nearly turned and crossed the distance between them and said everything he'd never said, everything he'd spent 3 years carefully not saying, everything that Rue's thought had just handed him the perfect, aching opening to finally answer. He didn't. His mother was waving from across the lot. The moment had a shape and a shrinking window, and Haru, who had spent his entire life choosing caution over courage, chose it one more time, the worst time, the time it would cost him the most. Instead, when Rue glanced over and caught his eye, Haru simply smiled. An ordinary, friendly, goodbye kind of smile, the kind you might give anyone. And Rue, reading nothing more into it than what was offered, smiled back the same way. "Good luck with everything," Rue called over, raising a hand in an easy wave. "You too," Haru said. "Congratulations again." And that was all. They didn't exchange numbers with any real intention of using them, the way you sometimes don't with people you suspect, correctly, that you may never see again. Rue's parents arrived. Haru's mother ushered him toward the car. And within the hour, both of them had been swept off into the separate currents of their own beginnings, each carrying a version of the other that neither would ever fully explain, not for 8 more years. Rue told himself, walking away, that it was a clean ending. It wasn't, not really, it only looked clean from the outside, the way a wound looks fine until you press on it. He carried Haru with him in the specific, low-grade way that people carry the ones who got away without ever quite arriving in the first place. Not devastating, not consuming, just there, a small weather system that never fully cleared, for brief mentions over 8 years that made his voice do a particular thing his sister always noticed and never quite named. Haru carried it worse, in his own quiet way, because he alone knew exactly what he'd let slip past him, and exactly how loudly Rue had been asking, in his own private language, for something Haru had been too afraid to answer. Chapter 5. Separate Weather. The years that followed moved the way years do when you're young enough to still be building a life instead of simply living one, quickly, in fits and starts, full of small victories and larger disappointments that felt enormous at the time and shrank, steadily, in the rearview mirror. Rue went to design school and did reasonably well at it, and fell into and out of 2 brief relationships that never quite took, each of them ending for reasons that felt, at the time, entirely unrelated to a boy from his old homeroom he almost never let himself think about directly. He built a small, steady career at a design firm, the kind of job that wasn't a dream exactly but was solid, dependable, something to be proud of in the unglamorous way that most real careers are. Haru's years took a stranger shape. He'd gone to a different university, studied a discipline that let him work mostly alone. Design, as it turned out, suited him unusually well, precisely because a page or a screen never once thought anything at him that he had to carefully filter out. He rose through the ranks of a mid-sized firm with a quiet, understated competence that his superiors found faintly mysterious. He always seemed to know exactly what a client wanted before they'd fully articulated it themselves, a skill nobody thought to question too closely, because results in the corporate world rarely invite scrutiny of their methods. He dated, occasionally, politely, without much success. It wasn't that he didn't try. It was that every person he sat across from at dinner, however kind, however genuinely interesting, existed in his mind next to an unfair comparison he never spoke aloud. A boy who'd sat 2 seats behind him for 2 years, whose thoughts had been louder and warmer and more alive to Haru than anyone else's had ever managed to be since. He kept a small, private habit of checking alumni updates online, an act he was faintly embarrassed by every single time he did it, scrolling past graduation announcements and job changes and wedding photos until he found, occasionally, some small update about Rue, a promotion, a change of city, once, memorably, a photo from a friend's wedding where Rue stood grinning in a rented suit, looking older and more settled than the boy Haru remembered, and no less magnetic for it. Around the 3rd year after graduation, in a moment of what he told himself was healthy self-discipline, Haru had nearly stopped the habit altogether. It's ridiculous, he'd thought more than once, to keep holding on to a feeling from high school. He's probably built an entire life that doesn't include you even in passing. Let it go. He'd almost managed it, too, until a chance conversation at an industry mixer. Small world. The kind that only exists in cities large enough to feel anonymous and small enough to keep circling back on itself. Introduced him to a design firm employee named Kenji, who mentioned, entirely in passing, over drinks neither of them needed, that his coworker Rue still hadn't dated anyone seriously in years, and joked that he must be holding out for someone. It shouldn't have meant anything. Haru told himself it didn't mean anything, for the length of exactly 1 drink, before admitting to himself that it meant everything, that some door he told himself was closed had, in fact, never fully shut at all, that he didn't do anything about it. Not yet. He didn't know how, and there was no urgent reason to force the question. Rue was a whole city and an entire unspoken history away, and courage, for Haru, had never once arrived on command. It arrived instead the way it usually does, sideways, disguised as something else entirely. A promotion. A company directive. A building he'd never worked in before, with a design floor he'd been told housed some of the firm's most promising junior staff that he didn't know. Walking in on his first day as the newly appointed creative director, that somewhere on that same floor, a familiar name sat 2 seats back from wherever he'd end up standing. Not literally this time, but close enough in every way that mattered. Chapter 6. The Directory. Rue found out the way most people find out things that reshape their entire week. By accident, standing in front of an announcement board he hadn't meant to stop and read. It was a Monday morning, unremarkable in every other way. He'd come in slightly late, coffee in hand, half thinking about a client deck due by Thursday, and had nearly walked past the lobby announcement board entirely before something. A name, a photograph, caught at the very edge of his attention and pulled him back like a hook. Announcing our new creative director. The photograph was more composed than the boy Rue remembered. Sharper suit, sharper jaw, an ease in the posture that hadn't quite been there at 17. But the face underneath all of it was unmistakable, was a face Rue had spent 2 years of his adolescence quietly, helplessly cataloging from 2 seats back. 8 years. 8 years and 100 small, deliberate efforts not to think about him too often. Undone in the space of one lobby announcement board. No way, he thought, staring. No way. It's him. It's actually him. He straightened his tie for the 3rd time in as many minutes, though there was no one nearby to notice, an old nervous habit resurfacing before he'd even consciously registered being nervous. He probably doesn't even remember me, he thought. It's been 8 years. I was just some guy who sat 2 seats behind him. Why would he remember? A shadow fell over him before he could finish the thought. He looked up, and there Haru was. Not a photograph this time, not a memory, but the real, present, entirely unavoidable fact of him, standing 3 feet away with the same composed, unreadable expression Rue remembered from 100 homeroom mornings, though something in his eyes, just for a second, seemed to flicker with an emotion Rue couldn't quite place. "Rue-san," Haru said. "It's been a while." Rue blinked, stunned that he'd used his name at all, let alone with such immediate, unhesitating familiarity. "You remember me?" There was a small pause before Haru answered, a pause that, had Rue known what to listen for, might have told him everything already. "Of course," Haru said, and then, before Rue could recover enough to say anything further, he continued down the hallway, leaving Rue standing frozen in front of the announcement board, heart hammering in a way that had nothing to do with the coffee. Haru made it exactly as far as his new office before the composure cracked. He sat down at the unfamiliar desk, in the unfamiliar chair, in the unfamiliar building that had, apparently, been housing the one person he'd spent 8 years failing to entirely stop thinking about, and stared at an unopened folder without seeing a single word on it. He still does that thing, he thought, unbidden, unable to stop himself. Straightens his tie when he's nervous. Nothing's changed. He closed his eyes. "I could hear you back then too, you know. Every single day." The thought arrived with a weight he hadn't expected. 8 years of careful silence pressing suddenly, urgently, against the inside of his chest. He'd told himself, for years, that the door had closed cleanly on graduation day, that whatever he'd felt in that classroom had been allowed to fade quietly into the ordinary sediment of adolescence, a feeling outgrown rather than buried alive. It hadn't faded. It had simply been waiting, the way certain frequencies wait in a room long after the source has gone quiet, ready to resonate again the instant the right note is struck. That afternoon, he found himself standing in the break room doorway without entirely remembering the decision to walk there, drawn by something he didn't examine too closely, and found Rue alone, pouring coffee, exhausted from an entire day spent pretending the morning hadn't happened. He probably has someone, Rue was thinking, unaware, pouring coffee he didn't especially want just to have something to do with his hands. Directors like him always do. And even if he didn't, "I never said anything back then. Why would tonight be any different?" Haru heard it, and something in him, some final, worn-down piece of the caution that had governed his entire life, simply gave way. "Rue," he said. Rue turned, startled, spilling a little coffee over his own hand. "Director." "Haru," he said. "Just Haru. Like before." A long pause stretched between them, charged with 8 years of things neither of them had said. Haru stepped closer, close enough that Rue had to look up slightly to meet his eyes. "Can I tell you something strange?" Haru said. "And ask you not to run out of the room?" Rue laughed, uneasy. "That's an ominous way to start." "I can hear thoughts," Haru said. "I always could, since before high school." Rue went very still, the coffee cup forgotten in his hand. "I heard you," Haru continued, quiet, unable now to stop the words once they'd finally started. "Back then, every day you sat behind me. Everything," Rue managed. "Enough to know I was too much of a coward to say anything back. And that single unguarded confession, 8 years overdue, was the thread that would eventually, later that evening, pull them both up to a rooftop terrace overlooking the city, where everything that came next would finally, at long last, be said out loud." Chapter 7. The Life We Chose. The city stretched out beneath the rooftop terrace in a haze of gold and blue, the kind of view that made everything feel smaller and more forgivable at once. Rue stood at the railing with Haru's hand still folded around his, unwilling to let go, as though the moment might dissolve the instant he did. 8 years of silence had just come apart in the space of one sentence, and he didn't trust the world yet to hold the pieces together without him gripping something solid. "Say something else," Rue said finally, his voice rough with all the things he hadn't let himself feel in one sitting before. "I want to hear you say something else out loud, not just in my head." Haru considered the request with a seriousness that made Rue want to laugh and cry in equal measure, as though it were an actual assignment handed to him and not a plea from someone who'd spent the better part of a decade convinced his own feelings would only ever exist as private static, heard by no one, answered by no one. "Okay," Haru said. "Rue. That's just my name. It's a good name, Haru said. I've been not saying it for 8 years. Let me enjoy this. Rue laughed, and it came out wet and a little overwhelmed, the sound of something finally being allowed to surface after being pressed down for so long it had started to feel like a permanent shape inside his chest. He leaned into Haru's shoulder, and for a while neither of them spoke. The city hummed below, indifferent to the fact that two lives had just quietly rearranged themselves on a rooftop above it. Are you listening right now? Rue thought, testing something, half hoping the answer would be no just so he could have one private thought left to himself, and half hoping it would be yes because some part of him had already gotten used to being heard. Yes, Haru said, without missing a beat. Rue pulled back, delighted and horrified at once. That's going to take some getting used to. For what it's worth, I try not to, Haru said. It isn't like a switch I can turn off completely, but I don't go looking. I never did. Not with you. Then why did you hear all of it back then? Haru was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that came from choosing an honest answer over an easy one. Because you were the loudest thing in my life, he said. Everyone else's thoughts came and went like static, background noise I'd learned to filter before I could walk properly. Yours I couldn't tune out even when I wanted to. Especially when I wanted to. Rue studied him for a long moment, trying to hold the shape of what he'd just said. That's either the most romantic or the most alarming thing anyone's ever told me. Can it be both? Yeah, Rue said, smiling despite everything. It can be both. He was quiet again, turning something over before he let himself ask it. Can I ask you something? And you actually have to answer, not just let me guess? Always. Did it ever feel unfair to you? Loving someone whose every thought you already knew, while I was stuck loving someone I couldn't read at all. Haru took a moment before answering. Unfair isn't the word, he said. Lonely is closer. I always knew what you felt about me, and I never knew what to do with that because acting on it would have meant admitting how I knew. So I just held it. Every single day, holding something I wanted more than anything and couldn't touch. That sounds worse than what I had. It wasn't a competition, Haru said gently. We were both bad at this in our own particular ways. Rue laughed, softer this time, and let himself lean fully into the moment instead of half-guarding it. We really were. He looked out at the skyline, then back at Haru, searching his face in the low light. So what happens now? Now, Haru said, I'd like to take you to dinner. An actual dinner where I pay, and you don't secretly hope I'll ask you something and then talk yourself out of believing I might. Rue flushed instantly. You heard that too? Rue? Haru said, the corner of his mouth curving. I heard all of that. Rue groaned and hid his face in his hands, and Haru gently pulled them down again, holding them instead. Don't, he said. I loved every second of it. I just never got to say so until tonight. Rue didn't remember the walk home. He remembered bursting through his own front door sometime near midnight, phone already in his hand, thumb hovering over his sister's name as though dialing her might make the entire evening more real by proof of retelling. Do I call her right now? He thought. It's almost midnight. She'll kill me either way for calling this late or for not calling immediately. He called anyway. It rang twice before Mina picked up, her voice thick with sleep and immediate suspicion. This better be an emergency, she said. Haru remembers me, Rue said, the words tumbling out faster than he could organize them. Haru liked me. Haru has liked me since high school, and I've been sitting on this feeling for 8 years like an idiot, and he just told me tonight, and I don't know what to do with my hands. There was a long pause on the other end, the particular silence of someone waking up fully in real time. The guy from your yearbook? Mina said finally. The one you drew a little heart next to in that photo album and then denied it was a heart? That was a star. It had a divot at the top. It was a heart, Rue. He laughed, mortified. Can you just be happy for me instead of doing forensic analysis on my teenage doodles? Her voice softened. I am happy for you. Genuinely. You've talked about this guy exactly 4 times in 8 years. And each time your voice did this weird thing. What weird thing? Like you were trying not to smile and failing, she said. Go to sleep. Tell me everything tomorrow. And Rue. Yeah? I'm glad. Really. I used to worry about you a little, you know. You'd get this look sometimes. Like you were homesick for something that hadn't happened yet. He was quiet for a second. I didn't know it showed. Only to me, she said. I'm your sister. It's my job to notice the things you think you're hiding. He hung up and sat on the edge of his bed, just breathing for a moment, the phone still warm against his palm. He looked at the ceiling for a long time, and then, finally, alone in the dark with no one to perform composure for, he let himself smile without checking whether anyone was watching. The next morning, Rue walked into the office trying very hard to look like a person who hadn't spent the previous night rearranging his entire understanding of the last 8 years of his life. He failed completely. Kenji fell into step beside him almost immediately, eyes narrowed with suspicion. Okay, Kenji said. What happened to you? Nothing happened to me. You're doing a weird power walk, and you said good morning to the vending machine. I did not, Rue said, mortified. You did. I watched you do it. They rounded the corner and nearly collided with Haru, who was reading a folder while walking, the picture of professional composure, as though the previous night had never happened, as though nothing at all had shifted in the architecture of his life. Good morning, Rue-san. Kenji-san, Haru said. Good morning, director, Rue said, far too quickly. Haru's mouth twitched, the smallest, most private amusement, gone as fast as it had appeared, and he continued down the hallway without breaking stride. Kenji watched him go, then rounded on Rue with the triumphant expression of a man who has just found the missing piece of a puzzle. That, Kenji said, whatever that was, that's the thing that happened to you. Nothing happened. Rue, your ears are red. It's cold in here, Rue said, hand flying to his ear. It's July. Rue said nothing further, walking faster. Kenji jogged to keep pace, grinning. I am not letting this go, he said. I will find out by lunch. By lunch, he had found out. Rue sat alone in the break room with a bento box he wasn't eating, staring at a new message on his phone. Dinner tonight? Somewhere that isn't the break room. When Kenji dropped into the seat across from him, arms crossed like a man ready to conduct an interrogation. Spill it. Rue sighed. It's the new director. Kenji froze mid-bite. The new director. Director Haru. The one who terrifies half of accounting. He doesn't terrify anyone. He terrifies me, and I don't even work under him. Rue smiled despite himself. We went to high school together. Wait. Kenji's eyes widened. This is the guy. The hard-doodle guy your sister mentioned once at that work party after too much plum wine. Everyone needs to stop bringing up the doodle. Rue groaned. So? Did something happen? Rue's smile deepened. Unguarded now. Yeah. Something happened. Kenji stared at him, then broke into a full grin. Finally. Do you know how many years I've watched you go soft-eyed whenever anyone mentioned a guy from high school, without a name attached? I thought you'd invented him. He's very real, Rue said. Unfortunately. Unfortunately? Rue hesitated, then decided that if he was going to tell Kenji anything, he might as well tell him the truth. He can read minds, he said, or hear thoughts. He's always been able to. He heard mine for the entire 2 years we sat near each other in class and never said a single word about it. Kenji set his chopsticks down slowly, his expression somewhere between disbelief and alarm. I'm sorry, he can what? I know how it sounds. It sounds like the setup to something that should worry you a lot more than you seem worried. Rue shrugged, oddly at peace with the whole situation despite the strangeness of explaining it out loud for the first time. I thought about that already. All night, actually. But he never used it against me. Never brought up anything I thought that I didn't want him to know. Not once in 8 years, not until last night. And even then, he was terrified to say anything at all. If someone had that kind of access to me for 8 years and only ever used it to be kinder to me, quieter around me, more careful with me, I don't know. It stopped feeling like a violation somewhere around hour 2 of thinking about it. Kenji studied him for a long moment. Okay. That's either the healthiest take on a genuinely wild situation I've ever heard, or you are extremely in love and not thinking straight. Rue grinned. Can it be both? God, fine. Both. Kenji leaned back, thinking. Does this mean he knows every dumb thing I've ever thought around him too? Probably. Don't ask him about it. I did once before I fully understood how it works, and he just went very quiet and said, some things are better left unsaid, and changed the subject. Kenji went visibly pale. That's terrifying. Welcome to my life now. That evening, they sat at a quiet corner table in a small restaurant Rue had never been to before. The kind of place with soft lighting and a menu that didn't need translating because the waiter simply brought what he thought suited the mood. Haru poured tea for both of them with the unhurried precision of someone who had clearly practiced small, careful gestures like this in his head long before he'd ever had the chance to perform them for real. Rue watched him do it, still not quite believing this was allowed to be his life now. Kenji knows, Rue said. I assumed he would, Haru said, unbothered. You're not exactly subtle. I am extremely subtle. You said good morning to a vending machine today. Rue buried his face in his hands. How do you even know about that? Kenji thought about it very loudly while standing 3 feet from my office door, Haru said, the smallest smile tugging at his mouth. This is going to be a problem, Rue said. You knowing everything everyone thinks about me. I don't listen to Kenji's thoughts, Haru said. I don't listen to anyone's generally, unless it's loud enough to be unavoidable. And most people's thoughts are quiet static unless something's actively distressing them. It was never a hobby for me, Rue. It was never something I enjoyed. If anything, it's exhausting, filtering it all out. All day, every day. Rue softened. I didn't think about that, what it must be like for you. I only ever thought about what it meant for me. That's fair, Haru said. It was never your job to think about my side of it. I never gave you the chance to. Rue reached across the table and took his hand. Tell me now, what was it like all those years? Haru was quiet for a moment, turning his teacup slowly between his fingers as though the answer required careful handling. Lonely mostly, he said. Everyone's thoughts felt like noise except yours, and yours I had to pretend not to hear, which meant I couldn't have you either, not really. I used to sit 2 rows ahead of you on purpose, so I'd have an excuse not to turn around and give myself away. I thought you just didn't like sitting near the back. I liked exactly one thing about sitting near the back, Haru said. And it was you. I moved seats to get away from my own feelings, and it didn't work even a little. Rue laughed, quiet and a little heartbroken on Haru's behalf. We really did that to ourselves for 8 years. We did, Haru said. I'd like to stop now, if that's all right with you. More than all right, Rue said, smiling. There was more, though, and Haru seemed to know he owed it to him. There's something else I should probably tell you, while we're being honest, he said. Rue went wary but curious. Okay. Graduation day, Haru said. You were standing near the gate, waiting for your parents, and you thought, very clearly, very deliberately, like you wanted it to be the last thing you ever let yourself think about me, that you hoped I'd have a good life, even if it wasn't with you. Rue went very still. I remember thinking that. I didn't think anyone would ever know I thought it. I almost said something that day, Haru admitted. I had the words ready, and then you turned and smiled at me. Just a normal goodbye smile, the kind you'd give anyone, and I lost my nerve completely. I told myself it was better to let you have a clean ending instead of a complicated one. It wasn't clean, Rue said quietly. It just looked clean from the outside. I know that now. 3 weeks later, Rue brought Haru home to meet his father, a prospect that had kept him awake most of the previous night, rehearsing conversations that never quite went the way he imagined. His father sat in his usual armchair, arms crossed, studying Haru with the particular scrutiny of a man meeting the person his son had chosen to bring home for the first time. Mina sat nearby, clearly enjoying the tension far more than she should have. Rue hovered near the doorway, anxious. So, his father said. Director, is it? Creative director, sir, Haru said. Yes. And you've known my son since when? High school, sir, Haru said. Though it took us both considerably longer than that to say anything about it. Mina snorted into her tea. Rue shot her a look she pointedly ignored. 8 years is a long time to wait. his father said. It was too long, sir, Haru said. I regret every year of it. His father studied him a moment longer, and then, unexpectedly, the corner of his mouth lifted. At least you know it, he said, extending a hand. Haru shook it, visibly relieved. Take care of him. He's more sensitive than he lets on. Dad, Rue said, mortified. It's true. You cried at that commercial with the dog last week. Noted, sir, Haru said, fighting a smile. And Rue dropped his head into his hands as Mina laughed openly now, delighted by the whole exchange. His father grew more serious, turning to Haru with the particular weight of something he clearly meant. I mean it, though, he said. He doesn't say when something's bothering him. Never has since he was small. You'll have to learn to ask, because he won't offer it up on his own. I've had some practice noticing things people don't say out loud. Sir, Haru said, nodding sincerely. I promise I'm paying attention. His father studied him, not quite understanding the full weight behind that sentence but satisfied by the tone of it. Good, he said. That's all I ask. Across the room, Mina caught Rue's eye and gave him a small, genuine smile, mouthing he's good. Rue nodded, his throat tight in a way he hadn't expected. The following week, they visited Haru's mother, a quieter and warmer occasion altogether. She served tea with the unhurried attentiveness of someone who had been waiting a long time for this particular visit, watching Rue with open curiosity as she poured. So you're the one, she said. The one, ma'am? Rue asked, nervous. Haru's been strange since he was 17, she said. Distracted, quiet in a specific way, like he was listening for something that never came. I used to worry about him. Haru shifted, uncomfortable, but didn't interrupt. And then last month he came home and told me he'd finally said something to a boy from his old class. She continued. I didn't need him to tell me your name. I already knew there'd been someone all this time. A mother knows these things. Rue glanced at Haru, moved. I didn't know it showed. That much. It showed to me, she said. Not to anyone who wasn't looking closely. He's good at hiding things, comes from years of practice, I imagine, for reasons I only partly understand and don't need explained to me. She looked between them, something gentle settling into her expression. I'm glad he stopped hiding this one. Under the table, Haru found Rue's hand and held it. Your father would have liked him, she added quietly, turning to Haru. You think so? Haru asked, caught a little off guard. I know so, she said. He always said the ones worth keeping are the ones who make you talk more, not less. You've said more in the last month than you did the whole year before it. Haru looked down at his tea, quietly moved, and Rue squeezed his hand beneath the table without a word. 2 months later, a small argument tested them for the first time in a way that neither of them had quite braced for. Rue stood in the doorway of Haru's office, arms crossed, clearly upset about something. Haru looked up from his desk, immediately alert. What's wrong? Nothing. Rue. Haru stood. Rue closed the door behind him, sighing. Sato came by the design floor today. Said you two had lunch last week. Said it like it was something I should already know about. We did have lunch, Haru said, calm. He's an old classmate, and he's opening a firm, wanted advice. I didn't think it needed a formal announcement. That's not. I'm not accusing you of anything, Rue said. I just felt stupid, hearing about your day from someone else before I heard it from you. Haru studied him properly now. You're not upset about Sato, he said. You're upset that I didn't tell you myself. Rue was quiet. Yeah, I guess I am. That's fair, Haru said. I'm sorry. I didn't think of it as something worth mentioning. But I should have known that not mentioning it would feel like I was keeping something from you, even if I wasn't. It's a small thing. I know it's a small thing. It's not small if it made you feel like that, Haru said. I'd rather hear about the small things from you before they turn into this. He crossed the room and tipped Rue's chin up gently. For what it's worth, I could have just listened for whatever was bothering you and skipped this whole conversation. I didn't. I wanted you to tell me yourself. Thank you for that, Rue said. A small, grateful smile breaking through. Always, Haru said. That's the deal we made, remember? No more overhearing. Just telling. I remember. They stood there for a moment, foreheads nearly touching. I still felt like an idiot for being jealous over nothing, Rue admitted. You weren't jealous over nothing, Haru said. You were jealous over being left out. Those aren't the same thing, and only one of them is something I actually did wrong. Rue softened completely. When did you get so good at this? I had 8 years of getting everything wrong to learn from, Haru said. I'd like to think I'm making up for lost time. 6 months later, they moved in together, and the small apartment they'd chosen quickly filled with half-unpacked boxes and the low, warm chaos of 2 lives being folded into one. Haru unwrapped dishes from newspaper while Rue argued, laughing, over where the couch should go. It goes by the window, Rue insisted. That's not up for debate. It blocks the door. It does not block the door. I can hear you considering, right now, whether you actually measured or whether you're just committed to being right, Haru said, deadpan. That's an unfair advantage and you know it, Rue said, pointing at him. I've had an unfair advantage with you for 9 years, Haru said, smiling as he set down a plate. Let me enjoy the novelty of using it for something as low stakes as couch placement, instead of just quietly loving you from 2 rows back. Rue crossed the room and wrapped his arms around him from behind. Fine, but if it blocks the door, I get to say I told you so for the rest of our lives. The rest of our lives is a very long time to hold a grudge about furniture, Haru said, turning in his arms. I'm a patient man. You said good morning to a vending machine. That is going to follow me forever, isn't it? Rue groaned. Forever, Haru said and kissed him brief and easy, the kind of kiss that comes from 2 people who've stopped being surprised they're allowed to do this. Later, boxes half unpacked, they sat on the floor against the correctly placed couch, sharing takeout straight from the containers. Can I ask you something kind of heavy? Rue said. Go ahead. Do you think you'd have said something eventually? If I hadn't ended up working near you again? If we just stayed strangers who used to know each other? Haru set his chopsticks down, thinking honestly about it. I'd like to say yes, he said, but I don't know. I was good at being afraid for a long time. It might have taken another version of that rooftop, another accident of proximity, before I found the courage on my own. That's an honest answer. I appreciate that more than a reassuring one. I'd rather you trust my honest answers than feel good about a comfortable lie. Rue leaned his head on Haru's shoulder. I'm glad the universe didn't make us find out the hard way. So am I. A few months after that, at a crowded industry conference, Haru stood near a booth looking tense, his jaw tight, eyes slightly unfocused in the way Rue had learned meant the noise had gotten to be too much. Rue made his way over. Hey, he said quietly. You okay? Too many people, Haru said through gritted teeth. Too many thoughts at once. It's like standing under a waterfall some days. Do you need to step outside? In a minute. I have a panel in 20. I just need to get through the noise. Rue took his hand and didn't let go, even as people passed and glanced at the gesture. Focus on me instead, he said. I'll think something boring and specific. Give you something quiet to hold on to. That's not really how it works, Haru said, a strained laugh escaping him. Humor me anyway. Rue closed his eyes and deliberately thought about something mundane. The grocery list from that morning, milk, rice, the leaking faucet in the bathroom that needed fixing. Haru's shoulders visibly loosened, just slightly. That actually helped, he said quiet, almost surprised. A little. Good. I'll be your faucet emergency anytime you need it. Haru laughed properly now, some of the tension draining out of him. Romantic. I contain multitudes. A staffer called Haru's name across the hall. He squeezed Rue's hand once before letting go. Thank you. I mean it. Go to your panel, Rue said. I'll be in the 3rd row thinking extremely loudly about lunch, so you have something to hold on to. Haru walked off, steadier than before, and Rue watched him go, quietly proud. That night, back at the hotel, Haru sat on the edge of the bed, tie loosened, looking drained. Rough day, Rue said. It's always rough in rooms like that, Haru admitted. I've just gotten good at not showing it. You don't have to hide it from me, Rue said. That was kind of the whole point of telling me the truth in the first place. Old habits, Haru said quietly. I spent so many years making sure nobody noticed anything was different about me that I still flinch toward hiding it. Even now. Rue sat beside him, arm around his shoulders. Then I'll keep noticing anyway. You don't have to ask. I know, Haru said, leaning into him. I'm getting better at letting you. A year later, Haru came home from a video call looking troubled in a way that made Rue set down the coffee he'd been carrying and ask directly what had happened. They offered me the position at the Osaka branch, Haru said. Regional creative head. It's a significant promotion. Okay, Rue said carefully. It would mean relocating. For at least 2 years, possibly longer. Rue sat on the edge of the desk, processing. Do you want it? Professionally, yes, Haru said. It's the kind of opportunity that doesn't come twice. And personally? Haru was quiet. Personally, I spent 8 years being too afraid to say something and losing time I can't get back. I'm not interested in repeating that mistake in a different shape. If taking this means losing what we have, I don't want it. You don't have to choose like that, Rue said gently. Not automatically. Talk to me about it instead of deciding alone what you think I'd want. Haru laughed. A small, surprised sound. That's fair. Force of habit. I spent so long assuming I already knew what people around me wanted that I forgot I don't have to guess with you. I can just ask. So ask. Would you come with me? If I took it? Rue didn't answer immediately. He thought about it seriously, the way the question deserved. My job is flexible, he said finally. I do design work, half of it's remote already. I'd have to talk to my team, but, yeah, I think I would come with you. You're not just saying that because you think it's what I want to hear? Haru asked, surprised, hopeful. You'd know if I were, wouldn't you? Haru listened for a moment, then relaxed. No, you mean it. I do, Rue said. Take the job, Haru. We'll figure out the rest together. That's the whole point now, isn't it? Not guessing anymore. Just asking. Haru reached across the desk and took his hand. Thank you, he said, for not making this harder than it needed to be. I spent 8 years making things harder than they needed to be, Rue said. I think I've used up my quota. 8 months later, they had settled into a new, smaller apartment in Osaka, half unpacked but already lived in the particular way that homes become lived in when the people inside them are happy. One evening, Rue sat at a desk with a laptop, sketching, when Haru came in, loosening his tie, tired but content. Long day, Haru asked. Good day. Client loved the concept. You? Long good, but long. He dropped onto the couch beside Rue, resting his head on his shoulder. Tell me something that isn't work. Rue thought for a moment. Kenji's engaged. Haru sat up. Finally. To Yuki. From accounting. To Yuki from accounting. He proposed at the same restaurant we went to on our first date. Apparently, though he swears it's a coincidence. It's not a coincidence, Haru said. He asked me for the name of the restaurant 3 months ago, and pretended it was for a work dinner. Rue laughed. You knew this whole time and didn't say anything? I try not to spoil things people want to be surprises, even when I already know. That's very you, Rue said, quiet and affectionate. Is that a compliment? It's the whole reason I'm still here after 9 years, so yes. A comfortable silence settled between them before Rue spoke again. Softer. Do you ever miss it? Tokyo. The company. Being closer to everyone we grew up with. Sometimes, Haru admitted. But I don't miss being someone who couldn't say what he felt. I'd rather be far from home and honest than close to home and quiet again. Rue leaned into him. Good answer. He was quiet a moment. Then, teasing. Do you still hear people's thoughts here? Different city, different noise? Same noise, different language, mostly, Haru said. Osaka's louder in general. I've had to get better at tuning things out. Do you ever slip? Hear something you shouldn't? Haru hesitated, then answered honestly. Once. Your coworker, the new one, Fujita. He thinks you're better at your job than you give yourself credit for, and he's a little intimidated by how fast you work. Really? Rue said, surprised and pleased. Really? I wasn't going to mention it because I don't like passing along things people didn't choose to say out loud. But you looked like you needed to hear it today. Thank you, Rue said quietly, touched, for choosing to tell me that one. I only tell you the good ones anymore, Haru said. Old habit. I always did prefer holding on to the good things you didn't know I'd heard. 2 years later, they returned briefly to Tokyo for a class reunion. Walking into a modest banquet hall strung with string lights, old classmates milling around with drinks in hand. Sato spotted them first, waving them over with the delighted disbelief of someone confirming a rumor he'd assumed was exaggerated. No way, he said. Rue and Haru. I heard a rumor, but I didn't believe it. Believe it, Rue said, laughing. When did this even start? You two barely spoke in school. Haru and Rue exchanged a look, a silent negotiation about how much to say. Longer ago than either of us admitted at the time, Haru said. That's suspiciously vague. It's a long story, Rue said. We've got an open bar and no curfew, Sato said. I've got time. Rue gave Haru the smallest nod, and Haru returned it. Short version, Rue said. He liked me since the second week of 10th grade. I liked him since around the same time. Neither of us said a single word about it for 8 years. Sato stared, genuinely stunned. 8 years? You sat 2 seats apart for 2 straight years. We were aware of the seating chart, yes, Haru said dryly. I always thought you were just quiet, Haru. Turns out you were just quietly obsessed with one specific person. Both things were true simultaneously, Haru said. Sato laughed and raised his glass. Well, to 8 wasted years and however many good ones you've got now. Congratulations, actually. I mean it. Thanks, Sato, Rue said. Before Sato wandered off, though, he paused, more thoughtful now. You know, he said, back in school, half of us thought Haru was just cold. Aloof. Nobody could ever get a read on him. He wasn't cold, Rue said. He was just spending all his energy trying not to give himself away. Guess that explains a lot, actually. I always wondered why he never dated anyone in 4 years of high school. Figured he just wasn't interested. I was interested in exactly one person, Haru said. I just didn't have the nerve to do anything about it for the better part of a decade. Sato shook his head, grinning. Well, I'm glad you finally figured it out. For what it's worth, watching you two tonight, it doesn't look like 8 wasted years. It looks like 8 years that just happened to lead here anyway. Once he'd finally wandered off toward the buffet table, Rue turned to Haru quietly. He's not wrong, you know? About which part? That it doesn't feel wasted anymore. It just feels like the long way to get somewhere we were always going to end up. Haru took his hand. I like that framing a lot better than wasted. Come on, Haru said after a moment, smiling. I want to see if they kept the old classroom the way it was. I have a very specific seat I'd like to show you. The one you moved to get away from me? The very one. I'd like to sit in it properly this time, with you next to me on purpose. The old classroom was dim when they found it. Mostly empty desks. Moonlight falling in long stripes through the windows. Haru walked to a desk near the front and sat. Here, he said. Rue walked to the desk 2 rows back, his old seat, and sat, looking at the back of Haru's head the way he must have for 2 straight years. This is a very specific kind of nostalgic, he said. Haru turned around, genuine. I used to sit here and listen to you think about anything except me, on the days I could manage it, because it meant I could just be a normal person having a normal day. And then on the days I couldn't manage it, I'd hear my own name in your head and have to stare very hard at the blackboard until class ended. Rue got up and moved to sit beside him instead. At the front. No more distance, then. No more distance. Rue rested his head on Haru's shoulder. In the same old classroom, in the same old light. For the record, he said, I thought your name a lot back then. I know. I was there for every single time. Rue laughed quietly. I keep forgetting that part. I don't, Haru said. I remember all of it. Every day you sat 2 seats back thinking things you thought no one would ever hear. And I heard everyone, and loved you a little more each time and said nothing. I don't plan on making that mistake again. In this room or anywhere else. He kissed the top of Rue's head, and outside, faint music drifted in from the reunion hall. Earlier that same morning, before any of it, they had visited a quiet cemetery together, the light still soft and gray. Haru knelt before a modest headstone and set down a small bundle of flowers, and Rue stood a respectful step back, letting him have the moment. Hi, Dad, Haru said quietly. It's been a while. He adjusted the flowers. This is Rue. I don't think I ever got the chance to properly introduce him to you. You'd have liked him. Mom already said so, and she's usually right about these things. Rue stepped forward, crouching beside him. Nice to finally meet you, sir, he said to the headstone. Your son kept me a secret for 8 years, so I hope you'll forgive the delay. Haru huffed a quiet laugh, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. He would have found that funny. He always said I took too long to say the things that mattered. Sounds like he knew you well. He did, Haru said. He used to tell me that the things worth having were rarely the things that came easy, and that patience wasn't the same as courage, no matter how much I wanted to believe it was. I don't think I understood what he meant until you. He set a hand briefly on the headstone before standing. I got married, Dad, to the person I used to be too afraid to say a word to. I think you'd be proud that I finally learned how. Rue took his hand as they turned to leave, the quiet morning settling comfortably between them. Thank you for bringing me here, he said. I wanted him to know, Haru said. Even if it's just me telling him. It still felt important to say it out loud, in a place like this. It is important. I'm glad you did. They walked together back toward the car, hands still linked, the cemetery quiet and green around them. 6 months after the reunion. They returned once more to Tokyo for a work trip, and found themselves, almost inevitably, back on the same rooftop terrace where everything had started. The plants had grown taller, a few of the lights had been replaced, but the view was unmistakably the same. Haru stood at the railing, looking out. This is where you told me, Rue said, joining him. Do you remember? I remember everything about that night, Haru said. I could recite it back to you minute by minute if you wanted. Maybe later, Rue said, smiling. Haru turned to him, and there was something different in his expression tonight. A nervousness Rue hadn't seen from him since before the confession. You're thinking loudly, Rue said. I can tell even without your power. Haru laughed. Nervous. That's fair. He reached into his jacket pocket and took out a small box, and Rue's breath caught in his throat. I've had 4 years to plan what I'd say for this moment, Haru said. And somehow I still don't think I've gotten it right, so I'll just say the true thing instead of the rehearsed one. He opened the box. A simple ring sat inside. I spent 8 years hearing everything you felt and saying nothing back, and I promised myself I'd never let silence be the thing that cost us again. So I'm not going to be quiet about this either. Rue, marry me. Let me spend the rest of it saying things out loud, the way I should have from the start. Rue's eyes filled, and he laughed, a little disbelieving, a lot happy. You planned this for 4 years and that's the speech you landed on? Is that a no? Haru asked, anxious. Rue pulled him into a kiss before he could spiral any further. It's a yes, you absolute idiot. Yes. Haru exhaled, relief flooding his features as he slid the ring onto Rue's finger. Below them, the city hummed exactly as it had the night this all began. 4 years, Rue said, laughing, wiping his eyes. You really sat on this ring for 4 years? I wanted the right moment, Haru said, and then I realized there wasn't going to be a right one. There was just going to be this one, or another year of waiting, and I've had enough of those to last a lifetime. Good, Rue said. No more waiting, from either of us. A few months after the proposal, the phone call came late at night, and Rue's world narrowed to a single point of fear. His father had collapsed. They thought it was his heart. Rue sat in a stark, fluorescent-lit hospital waiting room, hunched forward, hands clasped, shaking. Haru arrived at a near run, Tai Askew, having clearly left work the instant he'd gotten the call. "Rue," he said, breathless. "What happened? Is your father all right?" "They think it's his heart," Rue said, his voice tight. "They won't tell me anything more until the doctor comes out. I've been sitting here for an hour just thinking the worst, over and over. And I couldn't call Mina yet, because I didn't want to scare her before I actually knew something." Haru sat beside him immediately, taking both his hands. "I'm here now," he said. "You don't have to hold all of that by yourself." "I keep thinking about all the things I haven't told him," Rue said, his voice cracking. "Stupid things. That I'm proud of the life we've built. That I forgave him for being so hard on me about grades when I was 16. That I wanted him at the wedding walking me in, not just sitting in the front row." He wiped his eyes, embarrassed. "Sorry. You didn't need to hear all that." "I'm not just hearing it because I can," Haru said, quiet and steady. "I'm hearing it because you're finally telling me, out loud, the way we agreed. That's different, and it matters more." A doctor emerged, and Rue shot to his feet, Haru rising with him, a hand steady on his back. "Family of Mr.?" the doctor asked. "That's me. His son." "He's stable," the doctor said. "It was a minor arrhythmia, not a heart attack, frightening but very treatable. He'll need to stay overnight for observation, but he should make a full recovery." Rue's knees nearly buckled with relief. Haru steadied him, arm firm around his waist, and Rue turned into him, pressing his face to his shoulder, shaking slightly with the release of fear. "He's all right," Haru murmured into his hair. "You're all right?" "I've never been that scared in my life," Rue said, muffled. "I know. I felt it the second I got your message. I didn't need to hear a single thought to know something was wrong. You didn't even have to say it." Rue pulled back slightly, looking at him. "Is that what happens? Even now, you still just know, sometimes without trying?" "With you, always a little," Haru said. "I don't think that part ever fully goes away, and honestly, I've stopped minding it. It means I'll always know if you need me, even on the days you're too proud to say so." "That's not the worst thing to have, I guess," Rue said, small and wet with laughter. "A built-in alarm system." "That's exactly what it is," Haru said. "And it's never once gone off for a bad reason with you. Only ever this, you needing someone, and me getting to be the one who shows up." Later that night, they sat outside the hospital room, Rue's head heavy on Haru's shoulder, both of them worn thin with adrenaline finally draining out. "Thank you for dropping everything," Rue said. "There was never a version of tonight where I didn't come," Haru said. "I know," Rue said quietly. "That's the whole reason I called you first, before even Mina." Haru pressed a kiss to the top of his head, and they sat like that until visiting hours ended. A year later, Kenji and Yuki were married in a lively hall full of string lights and laughter, and Rue stood at the front with a best man sash, nervously tapping a spoon against a glass. Haru sat at the front table, watching with an easy smile. "Okay," Rue said, clearing his throat. "So, Kenji asked me to give this speech, which is either the biggest honor of my life or his way of getting back at me for every time I made fun of his tie collection." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Kenji, at the head table, raised his glass in mock toast, grinning. "I've known Kenji since our first week at the company," Rue continued. "When he asked me, completely unprompted, whether I thought his handshake was too firm, it still is. But somehow that's the same man who, 3 years later, figured out where I was secretly dating the new creative director before I told anyone, just by watching me say good morning to a vending machine." More laughter. Haru shook his head, smiling, resigned to the story following him forever. "Kenji, you've spent as long noticing the people around you as you have worrying about your own handshake, and somehow that combination turned you into the kind of friend who shows up every time without being asked," Rue said. "Yuki, you found the version of him that's actually worth marrying, underneath all the tie anxiety, and I don't think either of us could be happier for you both." He raised his glass. To Kenji and Yuki, may your handshake stay firm and your marriage stay firmer. The room laughed and toasted, and Rue sat back down beside Haru, who leaned over. Good speech, Haru said. You're just saying that. I'm not. I don't need to read anyone's mind to know that landed. Look at the room. Rue glanced around. Kenji, teary and laughing. Yuki wiping her eyes. The whole reception warm and loud. He exhaled, satisfied. I used to think I was bad at saying things out loud. You were, Haru said. For about 8 years. You've made up for it since. I had a good teacher, Rue said, grinning, bumping his shoulder against Haru's. I had a good reason to finally learn. Later, on the dance floor, Kenji pulled Rue aside during a slow song, slightly drunk on champagne and happiness. Hey, he said, thank you for the speech, and for, I don't know, being the reason I believed any of this was possible for me too. Watching you and the mind-reading director figure it out after 8 years of pining made the rest of us feel like there was still time. Rue laughed, touched. Glad we could be a cautionary tale and an inspiration at the same time. Honestly, best kind of story. The wedding, when it finally came, was small and modest, held in a garden that had clearly been chosen for its quiet rather than its grandeur. Mina sat in the front row, openly crying and not pretending otherwise. Kenji, married himself by now, sat with Yuki, grinning. Haru's mother watched from the front row on the other side, hands folded, quietly radiant. Rue's father, recovered and steady, walked him down the short garden aisle, arm looped through his son's. You know, he said quietly, just for Rue. After the hospital, I promised myself I wasn't going to miss anything else important. Glad I get to walk you into this one instead of just sitting in a chair watching it happen. Me too, Dad, Rue said, his throat tight. Me too. He's a good man, his father said. I said it the first day I met him and I still mean it. I know. I got lucky. He got lucky too. Don't let him forget that part. They reached the front. Rue's father shook Haru's hand once, warmly, then took his seat beside Mina, who immediately reached for a tissue. Rue and Haru stood facing each other, and the officiant asked for Haru's vows first. I used to think my ability was a burden, Haru said. Something that kept me apart from everyone, because I always knew too much and could never say I knew it. But it gave me 9 years of proof, long before I deserved it, that you were someone worth waiting for. I don't need to hear your thoughts to know how you feel anymore. You tell me now, every day. And I intend to spend every day after this one telling you back. Rue wiped his eyes, laughing wetly, and gave his own vows in turn. I spent 8 years thinking I was just talking to myself in my own head, he said. Imagining scenarios you'd never hear, half writing a love letter with no address on it. Turns out you had the address the entire time. You just didn't know how to knock. I'm glad you finally did. I plan on answering that door for the rest of my life. Haru laughed despite himself, his eyes bright, and when the officiant told them they could kiss, they did. And the small crowd erupted. Mina sobbing openly, Rue's father clapping loudest of all, Kenji whooping from the back row with Yuki laughing beside him. A week later, on their honeymoon in a quiet coastal town, they sat on a small balcony overlooking the water, a bottle of wine between them. Married, Rue said. That's a strange word to attach to us. Strange how? Good strange, Rue said. Like something that used to only exist in the version of this I imagined in class, and now it's just true, real, attached to my actual name. I liked that version too, for what it's worth, Haru said. The imagined one. Rue looked at him, surprised. You never told me you paid attention to those specifically. I paid attention to all of them, Haru said. There was one in 11th grade, where you imagined us at a beach very similar to this one. Rue flushed. That was a very specific daydream. I didn't think you'd remember details. I remember all the details, Haru said. It's the closest thing to a photograph I've got of us before this was real. Rue leaned over and kissed him, slow and unhurried. Well, now we get to make new ones. Actual photographs this time. I'd like that, Haru said. I'd like that very much. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the sound of waves below them, the wine slowly disappearing. "Can I ask one more thing?" Rue said eventually. "And you don't have to answer if it's too much. Go ahead. Was there ever a moment, in all those years, where you almost stopped loving me? Where the waiting got to be too much and you thought about just letting it go?" Haru answered honestly. "Once. Around the 3rd year after graduation. I told myself it was ridiculous to keep holding on to a feeling from high school, that you'd probably moved on entirely, built a life that didn't include me even in passing. I almost convinced myself to stop checking the alumni updates for your name. What changed? I ran into Kenji actually months before either of you worked together. Small world. Back then he was just a friend of a friend. He mentioned offhand that his coworker Rue still hadn't dated anyone seriously in years, and joked that you must be holding out for someone. I knew, the second he said it, that I wasn't ready to let go after all. I just didn't do anything about it until fate handed me a company directive and an elevator with your name on the building directory." Rue shook his head, smiling. "Kenji doesn't even know he did that. I should tell him." "Please don't. He'll never let either of us hear the end of it." "Fair enough," Rue laughed. "I'll let him keep thinking the vending machine story is the best one he's got on us. Let him have his theory." They clinked glasses, quiet and easy, the sea stretching dark and endless beyond the balcony. A year after they returned from the honeymoon, one evening while Rue washed dishes and Haru dried them in the old, easy rhythm they'd built between them, Mina's earlier question came up again. "Mina asked me today if we've thought about kids," Rue said. "Adoption, or otherwise." "Have we?" Haru asked carefully. "Thought about it, I mean, you've never brought it up before." "I have actually," Rue admitted. "Just never said it out loud. Guess I picked up a bad habit from somewhere." Haru smiled. "Fair. What do you think, honestly?" Rue dried his hands and turned to face him properly. "I think about it sometimes. And then I think about you, hearing a child's thoughts from across a room before they've even learned to talk. And I wonder if that would be a gift for you or something exhausting." Haru considered this seriously. "Both, probably. Children's thoughts are different. Messier, louder, less guarded. It might be overwhelming some days. But I think I'd like it, knowing always, if they were scared or happy or lying about eating their vegetables." Rue laughed. "That last one might actually be useful. Extremely useful. So that's a maybe? That's a let's actually talk about it seriously, and not just as dishwashing conversation," Haru said. "But yes, a maybe that leans toward yes." Rue set the last dish down and pulled him into a hug. "Good. I like our maybes. They've turned into pretty good yes so far." "They have, haven't they?" Haru said quietly into his shoulder, and they stood like that for a while, the kitchen quiet around them, dishes finished, nothing urgent left to do but exist together. Several years later, the home they shared had filled with the ordinary evidence of a full life. Photographs on the wall from the wedding, from Osaka, from the reunion, from the seaside honeymoon. Haru, a little grayer at the temples now, sat reading in his usual chair. Rue entered carrying 2 cups of tea, a little older too, and settled beside him. "Still reading the same report for the 3rd time?" Rue asked. "It's a good report," Haru said, not looking up. "You're not even reading it. You're thinking about something else." Haru finally looked up, a small smile forming. "Caught me. What is it?" "Just remembering," Haru said. "That classroom. How loud you were without ever saying a word out loud. I used to think it was the hardest secret I'd ever have to keep. And now it's just a story we tell at dinner parties. Kenji still doesn't fully believe the mind-reading part, by the way. He thinks I'm exaggerating for effect." Rue laughed. "Maybe don't correct him. Let him have his theory. Whatever you want." The doorbell rang before either of them could settle back into the quiet. Rue got up to answer it. It was Mina holding the hand of her young daughter, Momo, who was maybe 6 years old. "Sorry to drop by unannounced," Mina said. "Momo insisted on seeing Uncle Haru, who hears thoughts before bed." "Of course she did," Rue laughed, letting them in. Momo ran straight to Haru, who set his book aside and crouched down to her level. Uncle Haru, she said. Mom says you can hear what people are thinking. Is that true? Sometimes, Haru said gently. Not always. Only the loud thoughts, usually. Momo scrunched her face in concentration. What am I thinking right now? Haru pretended to listen very seriously for a moment. I think you're thinking about the cookies in the kitchen jar, he said. And wondering if Uncle Rue will notice if one goes missing. Momo gasped, delighted and a little scandalized. That's not fair. He's not wrong, is he? Rue laughed. No, she admitted, sheepish. Go on, then, Mina said, smiling and shaking her head. One cookie. Then it's bedtime. Momo scampered off toward the kitchen, and Mina lingered, watching her brother and Haru with quiet fondness. You two are good at this, she said. The whole settled, comfortable thing. It's nice to see after everything. It took us long enough to get here, Rue said. Most good things do, she said gently, and followed Momo toward the kitchen, calling out a good night over her shoulder. Rue closed the door softly and returned to the couch, sitting back down beside Haru. Do you ever regret it? Rue asked. Any of it? The years we lost, the waiting, all of it? Haru thought about it honestly. I regret the years, he said. I don't regret how we got here. If I could go back and tell my 17-year-old self one thing, it would just be to say something sooner. But I can't be sorry about the shape our life took, because it took the shape of you eventually, and that part one wouldn't trade. That's a very diplomatic non-answer, Rue teased. It's the truest one I've got. I'll take it, Rue said, smiling. He looked at the photographs on the wall, the two of them younger at every stage since the rooftop. We turned out all right, didn't we? For two people who were terrible at saying things out loud. We got better at it, Haru said. That's the part that mattered. Do you remember the last thing I thought, that very first night, before you finally said anything on the rooftop? Haru smiled. You thought, please let this be real, and not just another thing I imagined about him that never actually happens. Rue went quiet, a little stunned even after all these years. You still remember that exactly. I remember it because it was the moment I realized how much you'd built up, quietly, for years, without ever letting yourself believe it could happen. Haru said. I couldn't let that thought go unanswered. Not that one. It was real, though. In the end. It was. It is. Every day since. Rue reached over and laced their fingers together. An old, familiar gesture by now, worn smooth with years of use. For the record, he said, if you could go back and tell that version of me, sitting 2 seats behind you, terrified of his own thoughts, one thing, what would it be? Haru thought about it seriously. I'd tell him to keep thinking loudly, he said, that someone was listening, and would love him for every single word of it. Eventually, even if it took too long to say so. Rue's eyes went glassy again. That's a good thing to tell him. I mean it, Haru said. Every word of it. Then and now. Outside the window, the city lights looked almost the same as they had from that first rooftop, all those years ago. Quieter now, but no less bright. 8 years of silence, Rue said softly, almost to himself. And a whole lifetime of not being quiet anymore. I think we did all right in the end. We did better than all right, Haru said, pulling him closer. We got everything we spent all that time too afraid to ask for. No regrets then? Only the years we lost before we started counting the ones we kept, Haru said. Everything since has been worth every bit of the wait. He kissed the top of Rue's head one last time, and the room settled into the easy quiet of two people who no longer needed to imagine anything. Because they finally, always, had each other, out loud. The end.